Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the latest episode of TechForge, the CrossForge Gaming Weekly Tech Podcast. Tonight with me, I've got Jason. Unfortunately, our normal guest host Hunter is currently out earning a living. He's having to do some travel for work. So it's just Jason and I this week, but we have some good topics to talk with you about. Before we jump into those, Jason, anything new to share?
Well, I've been busy at work, so I'm changing jobs soon, and I'm going to be moving from a work at home environment to back to the office. So that's interesting. So I'm transitioning everything there to another team member, and I've been having issues with my VRM overheating. So I was in some meetings a day or two ago, and got bored, so I started cleaning some of my old super dusty, really bad quality 120s that I've had for probably ever. And I went ahead and got to my case. I guess I can show you here.
Okay.
With my webcam.
Oh, field trip time.
Here we go. Nice little ghetto style zip tie. So I've got some zip ties around the base right there. And then I've also got it tied to my AIO pump hose here.
Nice.
And got it right on the VRM. And if you put your hand on the VRM, it's not hot to the touch anymore. It's actually like probably around 30 degrees Celsius, whereas before it'd be around 60 right now.
Not bad. Sounds like you got some good VRM cooling going on there.
Yes, sir. So this P3 case is awesome and it looks pretty, but that's one thing that you get with the nice ATX case is airflow, and well, there's just not much airflow in that P3. So when I had it, so I was experimenting with some heavy workloads today and some Prime 95 testing, and at one point, the processor was eating about 170 watts of power with all cores at 4.2 gigahertz. And it was right around 1.5 volts. Not me that set it that way. That's PBO setting. And
goodness.
The VRM was right around 105 C. The same workload would have just caused my PC to crash. So that ghetto style 120 is very, very valuable. Like I can't even think. Very valuable. Haha. So yeah, a little bit of airflow over the VRMs works wonders.
Well, I'm glad you were able to get it finally fixed.
It's not fun.
Yeah, when you're dealing with overheating VRMs, that is no fun at all.
Correcto.
Tech-wise, not much, not a whole lot new going on at work for me, but amusing little anecdote. So we got a letter early last week at my apartment complex about how we were going to be running AT&T fiber into our apartment complex. So I'm glad to hear that we're finally going to get fiber here, so I don't have to keep depending on the good graces of Comcast. And so they said, we'll tell you which weeks they're going to be putting in which buildings, and they just listed that our building was going to be sometime that week. Okay. So Thursday morning, I'm dressed, I'm heading out the door. I'm about 20 minutes early to head to work. So I'm actually going to get to work, way early for once instead of right on time or slightly late. And I get down to the bottom of the apartment complex and I see the AT&T truck there. And I see the guys standing there and they're getting their stuff together. And I said, "Excuse me, are you wiring this building today?" And they said, "Yes." "Okay, which floor are you doing first?" "Third floor," which is the one I'm on. Okay. So I run back upstairs, I put my stuff down, and I head out to each of our apartments are arrayed in a way that we have a little balcony and we have a small storage closet outdoors on that balcony. Well, because of where they were putting in the boxes, you had to clean out the outdoor storage closet. And since they hadn't told us which day they were going to be doing that, I hadn't done it yet. So I had to run back up to my apartment and clean out that closet, shove it into a corner of my apartment, clean out the corner that they were going to need to drill out for the fiber box.
Mm-hmm.
And then at that point, I am almost running late for work, so I run back down to my car and go to work as quickly as I can.
Oh my gosh.
But yeah, so good news. I'm getting AT&T fiber sometime in the next couple of months. At least that's what the apartment office claims. Bad news, it almost made me late for work.
Well, you know, if you can move away from Comcast and their friendly customer service, their world-class customer service, and move to fiber optic with better service, I don't know. I don't know, if it were me, I'd probably take the trade. You know, one day being a little bit late.
I mean, honestly, the only reason I went with Comcast when I first came to my apartment here was because they are literally the only option. And so if they're giving us an option to move away to AT&T fiber, which I'm sure will be faster, because I have the second highest plan you can get right now, and I get 75 down and 10 up. So
that's it for your market?
Yep.
75 now?
Well,
wow.
Technically, I could get the next highest package, which is 100 down and 25 up, but I'd have to spend almost $30 more a month.
Yeah, at some point it becomes diminishing returns, you know.
And this particular package, when I first got it, you know, for the first 2 years, it was fairly reasonably priced because, you know, you sign one of those contracts that gives you that special sweetheart deal for the first 2 years. Yeah, the price basically went up almost 40% this year. So,
wow. Wow.
So yeah, Comcast, if you're listening, if you want to keep my business, you're going to have to do better than AT&T fiber, okay?
That's not going to happen.
I mean, although honestly, the thing that spurred AT&T to start laying fiber around here was the fact that Google threatened to come to Nashville.
Oh, did they?
Yes. Google narrowed Nashville as one of the 3 finalists, and that's when Comcast and AT&T in Nashville filed a lawsuit in court to try and keep them from connecting to the poles the 2 of them used.
What?
And so it's been in a fight in courts ever since.
That's ridiculous. You know, it's getting to a point where there should be no excuse for decent-sized urban centers like Nashville to not have some major fiber backbones.
I mean, good grief. If Chattanooga, which is half the size of Nashville, can have gigabit internet for everyone who lives within their electrical co-op range, there's no reason why we can't have gigabit here.
Completely agree. I had a friend of mine who lives about 5 minutes away. We've had a bit of a falling out in the last year, but I remember last summer he was so fed up with Comcast. He started meeting regularly with his neighborhood, and they were getting together. They were putting a fund together to hire somebody to come out and lay fiber directly to their neighborhood and create a fiber backbone in their neighborhood because he was so fed up with Comcast. And he's one of those types of individuals that Can you hear me?
Yes, I can
Oh,
hear you
okay.
just fine.
He's one of those types of individuals that, he's super laid back and he doesn't do anything. So for him to get up off of his rump and do something that profound, he has to have just been, at one point he just said, "Ah, the heck with it. I'm sick of this. I'm not putting up with that anymore."
I mean, the thing is, I've seriously considered just dropping my cable TV service altogether. Because, again, when I purchased the bundle I have, it was because it was one of those sweetheart deals that they give you the first 2 years. And, I was like, well, if I'm going to mostly be using the internet, I might as well have the TV package anyway, because it's cheaper. At that point, it was cheaper to get the bundle package than it was to get just the internet.
Oh, you gotta love it when they do that.
Yeah. So it made sense then, but I've seriously considered dropping my. I only had the very most basic cable, like
Okay.
the local channels, C-SPAN, Discovery Channel, and like maybe a dozen others.
Are you still under that contract, or does it expire soon? Because
It
your
should,
price will probably go up.
yeah. I'd have to check to be absolutely sure, but my thinking is if AT&T Fiber doesn't get here pretty soon, I'm probably just going to drop the TV portion, go to internet only, because 99% of what I watch is either Netflix, Amazon Prime, or YouTube. Oh, and Crunchyroll.
Yep. Yep. I cable. I don't see how cable or satellite media is going to last very much longer. I mean, there's so many streaming services that are, if not already online, they're coming online soon. They're affordable, and they offer a ton of content and
Well,
pretty decent value. And you can kind of build out. You can build out a number of those services that are content that you would watch. Versus channel surfing on cable, when like 80% of the time you just cable surfing, there's nothing on.
right.
So,
I think the main way they're going to stay alive is people like my parents. They live out in the middle of nowhere. There is no cable service near them within, I think, like a 5-mile radius. And the only way they can get internet is through HughesNet. The only way they can get TV is through satellite because they live too far from a major metropolitan center to pick up over-the-air TV signals.
we've got some communities like that out here in Illinois, but they're kind of far and out of the way. Like if one of the ways we usually when we're scouting neighborhoods or if we're moving, if you see lots of satellite dishes up, it's probably not a good place to move to.
Sad but true. And the crazy thing is, if they lived about 3 miles closer to town from where they are, they could at least get DSL, which is not a fantastic improvement speed-wise, but the latency would be a whole lot better.
Well, not only that, but you're dealing with, I think with DSL, the pricing is still somewhat affordable. Maybe not when you look at when you take the pricing per bandwidth, and compare it with either fiber or cable, but at least most of the data packages are still affordable, and they've got a decent monthly bandwidth cap. So
yeah, it's closer. Instead of being the 50 gigabytes a month they have with HughesNet, it's something like closer to a terabyte a month.
Right. Which, and honestly, that's usually what you find in more of your middle to upper tier cable packages. like you're 75 down, like you've got, or 100 down.
Yeah, I am fortunate that where I'm at, Comcast, their policy is 2 terabytes a month, and
Nice.
but I think again that's only largely because I'm in a market where they're actually having to compete against AT&T and potentially soon against Google.
I think things are going to drastically improve when Google comes in.
Yeah, fiber to the home and gigabit internet offered by Google. It's almost worth having all my data mined.
You got double the bandwidth cap I've got, and I've got 100 down and 20 up.
All right. Well, I guess enough banter. We do need to get into some of the topics for today because we have some really good ones.
Cool.
Going to be focusing on. We'll jump into the tech news first, but just to let you know, we are going to be looking at Intel's Core i9-9900K. There's been some leaked benchmarks about that. More leaks about AMD's Ryzen Threadripper 2000 series. And the big topic for today, we're going to talk about AMD's release of their B450 motherboards.
Sweet.
But before all that, some quick tech news. This first one comes from PC World. Intel says it will finally have 10-nanometer PC processors by holiday 2019.
No more plus, 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 plus.
Does anyone else remember when they said they were going to have 10 nanometer by 2017? But in all fairness, Intel has had a number of problems with their 10 nanometer process. And so that's why with Coffee Lake, we're seeing, I believe this is the 4th iteration of their 14 nanometer process. Their first version was Broadwell, followed by Skylake, Cabby Lake, now Coffee Lake. Actually, technically, this will be the 5th iteration with the Coffee Lake refresh. And so this story was written by Mark Hatchman over at PC World. And in their earnings call last Thursday, Intel indicated that they would deliver in the second half of 2019, but in particular, they did mention that they would be certain to have them manufactured in time for the holidays 2019. So we will not be seeing 10 nanometer processors from Intel until at the very least late next year. There was also a number of things that were mentioned during this earnings call, namely that Intel reported a net income of $5 billion, which was up 78% for the quarter, and reported annual revenue of $17 billion.
That's insane. I don't think anyone can quite comprehend, like, if they were to just imagine that amount of money. I don't think it's comprehensible. So I thought I saw something regarding Intel and 10 nanometer in Q3 of this year.
They are planning to release certain 10 nanometer kind of test chips, but those are going to be in their Whiskey Lake and Amber Lake lines, which I believe are more on the low end.
Okay, that would repeat what they had with the 14 nanometer when it first came out. They had low power processors kind of trickling through, and then some mobile, lower end mobile. And it's through okay.
Let's see. Yeah, so Oh, apologies. So Whiskey Lake are going to be the U series chips. Those are the mobile processors that are designed for low power applications. And the Amber Lake chips are going to be the Y series processors, which are basically the ultra low power, uh, like the tablet PC
Oh,
processors.
right. You know what it is? I'm getting the Coffee Lake refresh mixed up with 10 nanometer. Never mind. Yeah, so
It's
the
an easy
Coffee Lake,
mistake to make, honestly.
yeah, the Coffee Lake refresh is coming out Q3. That's gonna put them behind AMD.
Yeah, which is an odd turn of events.
Very odd.
AMD was stuck with the FX series of processors on the 32 nanometer process for a long, long time.
Yeah, and 28
And
nanometer with their APUs.
yep, when they moved to the Carrizo architecture for them. And, with Ryzen, they moved to 14 nanometer for the first time. And for the Ryzen 2000 series, they're actually moving to a 12 nanometer process.
Yeah, which I don't know what's better, the 14 nanometer plus 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 that Intel has, or AMD's current 12. You can probably make an argument both ways. But when they move to 7 nanometer, there's no arguing. That's where the arguments stop.
Yeah, and one of the other things we're going to talk about, when AMD had their earnings call earlier, I believe that was last week, was when they talked about they are currently sampling 7 nanometer EPIC, or they called it Rome, which is that's the, sorry, I'm getting tongue tied here. The 7 nanometer EPIC CPUs cores are the ones that they are sampling for basically what will be the next generation of Ryzen and Threadripper chips. Not the 2000, but the 3000 series, presumably. And they're already sampling 7 nanometer Vega to some of their high end customers who do that kind of testing work. And the early rumors are, quote, encouraging, end quote. So yeah, we'll see how Intel does with 10 nanometer by 2019.
I don't know. This is the second manufacturing process jump that they've made where they've had major issues and slipping release dates. They had, how long was 14 nanometer postponed? I mean, it was so bad they had to release Devil's Canyon.
Yeah, so Haswell came out in 2013, and the Haswell refresh came out in, I think it was early 2015, late 2014, early 2015.
Sounds right.
And then with Broadwell as a 14 nanometer part, only had a very limited release. You had you had several 5000 series laptop chips, but you really only had a few 5000 series on the desktop. The only real standouts were the 5670 or the 5675 and the 5775C, which were that generation's equivalents of the K series processors, but those were basically test chips because they were testing the idea of embedding DRAM into your fourth level cache to see how that would help graphics performance and processing power. It actually made the 5775C on par graphics wise with the 6000 series APUs, but it had the same processing power as a 4790K. CPU wise.
It's impressive.
So it was a good part, but it was a very, very limited run. And to find motherboards for them is a pain.
Well, they effectively just pretty much skipped Broadwell because of all of their postponements regarding the 14 nanometer process implementation. They were so late into what their planned Broadwell release was going to be, or their Broadwell life cycle, that I think once 14 nanometer finally was implemented, they pretty much just skipped directly to Skylake.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much exactly what happened. Because Broadwell was originally supposed to come out in 2014. It didn't. They came out with Devil's Canyon, which was the Haswell refresh. And then, Broadwell didn't come out until the second half of 2015, which pushed Skylake into 2016. And from there, it's basically been a stack of dominoes.
It kind of makes you wonder what these fabs are doing that Intel is not doing, like TSMC and Global Foundries. Because companies like NVIDIA and AMD have gone fabless, or have always been fabless. And while they partnered up with fab companies like TSMC and Global Foundries, they had some issues with some of their process shrink implementations, but I want to say over the last few years, it almost seems like TSMC and Global Foundries have been beating Intel, or at least becoming on par with Intel, and now Global Foundries is surpassing. It's interesting.
Yeah, I think a lot of it comes down to Intel's complacency. They were at the top of the market, and no one could touch them. And I think they decided to rest on their laurels. Because honestly, if you look from Sandy Bridge onward, each generation, you only saw single-digit improvements over the previous one.
Right.
Ivy
on
Bridge,
average, 5%.
Yeah.
3 to 5%.
Ivy Bridge was the biggest jump. It was about 8 to 11% on average. Haswell was, I don't remember. I think it was about 7% over Ivy Bridge. The Haswell refresh was basically 0 because it was just Haswell overclocked.
Mm-hmm.
Skylake has had faster IPC than Haswell, but didn't really feature much faster clock speeds.
Well, the big thing with Haswell was just a more modern chipset and all of the features that came with the chipset, I think, over Haswell. Now, the Z97 did introduce M.2. I don't remember what PCI Express they had, if it was 2 or 3. But then Skylake came out. I don't remember exactly what was up with that chipset, but it had some fundamental modernization of the chipset.
I think it was native USB 3.1, along with DMI 3.0. That's Direct Media Interface 3.0. And also featured DDR4 support, and there's some type of media encoding that I don't remember off the top of my head.
Oh, that's right. They had oh shoot, what was it? It had to do with Windows 8.
Was it H.265?
It was actually some BS because there were a lot of streaming videos that wouldn't stream HD unless you had that chipset or greater in a Windows version, specific Windows version or higher. HDC, I want to say HDCP, but that doesn't seem right to me.
No, it was I know what you're talking about, but
It was
it's
silly.
it was something that did not last
ridiculous.
very long.
It was ridiculous. Uh, so yeah, I think we got off topic.
Anyway, speaking of streaming, though, how would you like to stream your desktop? And not like your desktop being streamed from something else, but literally you stream your desktop from a server that Microsoft controls, because apparently that is the direction Microsoft is choosing to move. This comes from Computer World by Stephen J. Von Nichols,
Oh yeah, I think I'm
talking
ready.
about the new Microsoft Managed Desktop. They are billing it as a desktop as a service offering. Basically, instead of buying a Windows copy, you would essentially rent it by the month, much the way that you do now with services like Office 365.
Yeah, I mean, the more integrated we get as a society, and the more connected we get, I mean, you knew that something like this was coming. I really worry about this a lot. Renting Windows, essentially. I really worry about this a lot. I don't know. I really kind of worry about the pricing structure. Man, yeah. There's some advantages. I mean, it's probably more secure. It's probably easier to update, more seamless. I'm sure there's some things with the desktop experience that are potentially better. What if you have to work in an offline mode? What if you have multiple PCs?
Well, Microsoft's argument in that case is that, well, most of the operating system is going to be on your PC. It's just going to be, the update portion that's going to be handled in the cloud. But anyone who's done any IT work knows how well that actually works, which is that it doesn't.
Right.
I mean, all you have to do, hop onto any forums dedicated to Windows. Look up the Windows 10 April 2018 update. See how many, literally thousands of issues people had. Everything from bugs where it completely bricked the PC, to things where it wouldn't let people log in properly, to activation errors, just the whole gamut of things that update did.
Wow.
I mean, good grief. When Word, Outlook, and the File Explorer lock up and Control-Alt-Delete won't bring up the Task Manager, you have a serious problem.
Yeah, I'll say. That's about as reliable as you typically get in Windows Control-Alt-Delete. If that's not working, it's definitely time to reinstall.
I mean, there's entire threads where highly respected publications were saying, if you don't already have the update, turn off automatic updating until Microsoft gets it fixed, because otherwise you are potentially going to brick your PC. And you're the people you want to hand over control of when and how I update my PC?
Right. From a gamer's perspective, I don't like this at all. I don't like this at all.
I mean, we escaped the model of dumb terminals connected to a mainframe over 30 years ago. And this is essentially Microsoft trying to take us back there so they can make more money and mine more data.
We also escaped Windows without a start button.
Yeah.
Because people would just install their own start button.
Hey, I had a Windows 8 machine and I installed Classic Start, and it was actually a pretty good mod overall.
Yep, I enjoyed it. I had the same thing. No, or did I have Start as Back? I think I had Start as Back. It's basically probably the same thing.
Yeah, implemented slightly differently, but
yeah. I'm worried about this. I don't know. I don't agree with it. This would be the type of thing to get me to move directly to Linux and stay on Linux.
Likewise, I mean, I've been playing with Linux for years. Uh, Honestly, most of my PCs are running Linux because all except for my gaming PCs, 95% of what I can do on Linux for free.
Exactly. My parents are on Linux. Almost all of their machines are on Linux. My
Uh,
parents, they're retirees, so
yeah, you were mentioning you're running Linux Mint on their machines, right?
um,
Or are
they've
you
got
running regular Ubuntu?
well, so they were running Ubuntu until I discovered Mint. Mint, I just prefer its desktop experience better than Ubuntu. Um, really did not care for Unity when they went away from GNOME and KDE versions to Unity. Didn't like it. But so I've pretty much had them converted over to Mint. In fact, since I built this new machine, I put an SSD and cleaned up my old i5 and gave it to my dad and installed Mint, I think Mate, Linux Mint with the Mate desktop, and he's pretty happy with it. In fact, I was surprised how fast it is. Windows 10 was a pretty good experience on that machine, but Linux Mint with the Mate desktop, it boots up in less than a second or two. I mean, it's running off of a really inexpensive PNY SSD. It's a SATA SSD. There's nothing special about it, but it's fast. But yeah, they've got a bunch of really inexpensive laptops or older laptops, and all of them are running Linux Mint on SSDs. Every single one of them.
Yeah, I'm running Mint on most of my computers. I'm using the Cinnamon desktop just because I've used. I'm going to put on my Linux pedant hat here for a second. It's technically Mate. Well, okay, so there's a long story behind that.
Karate Kid, man.
There's a long story behind that. So the team that originally started building the Mate desktop was based out of, I believe it was Brazil. And there's a drink down there called Mate Herba.
Okay.
It's a pretty popular strong drink down there. And when they ceased development on it, it was picked up by Martin Wimpress and a team out of the UK. Well, they kept the name Mate, but they didn't leave the little accent mark over the E to let you know that it's pronounced differently. So everyone who has no experience with knowing with that particular desktop environment, yeah, I called it Mate for about the first 6 months I used it too. Until if you ever go watch Joe Collins' channel, he talks about this quite a bit. He does a lot of good videos if you're wanting to get started in Linux Mint, but he's also a fan of the Mate desktop. And basically every video where he features any Linux distribution with the Mate desktop, he has to go into the spiel again, because every time he'll wind up with comments on the video. Why are you calling it Mate? It's Mate.
Yeah.
But anyway,
I've been using it for years, and I've always called it Mate. But I've never had to do any research into it other than the the occasional issue that you run into and you need some terminal commands. Other than that, or terminal script. Beyond that, it's pretty much just works.
Yeah, it's rock solid. And like I said, I didn't know it either till I went to start, doing more research on it and other desktops, because I'm rabbit trailing here. But the reason I found out was because I went to go install Arch on a machine.
Okay.
And I wanted to install what I called the Mate desktop. Well, I misgoogled something and I wound up on the page about the project for the Mate desktop environment. And they have this big whole spiel in the introduction about why it's pronounced Mate. But yeah, it's headed by a guy, Martin Wimpress. If you ever get the chance to talk to him, he's very chill.
Cool. I'll have to look him up. So I'm looking at this. So kind of coming back to what we were talking about, Ned. I'm looking at this this article here. Yeah, this literally sends shivers down my spine because I've worked within Citrix environments and they're not fun. It's not a good experience. They're
yeah,
slow,
I've used.
sluggish.
We have to use Citrix for some of the things I do at work, and the latency that Citrix introduces is pretty crazy. Like I'm not running a slow machine at work. It's a laptop, yes, but it's got a Haswell i5 in it. It's got 8 gigs of RAM. It has an SSD. It's not a slow machine. But when I can open up a particular application through Citrix, pretty dependably, I know that I can walk down the hall, get a cup of coffee, come back, and then it'll finally be open.
I don't know who's on their performance team, but they need to be fired, or they need to figure out what actual performance requirements are.
Right.
Which performance requirements come from usability industry requirements. Oh my gosh, Citrix. You know, I've turned down IT jobs because they wanted their analysts to be on Citrix workstations for their work.
Ouch.
Yes, I will not work in a Citrix environment. Either I work from a workstation that the operating system is installed natively, or I don't do it at all. Or it's a virtual environment that's literally installed locally. That I'm okay with too. But nope, sorry, no Citrix.
All right, before we get too far afield, let's take a look on some of this other tech news we got here. Next one's a review from Tom's Hardware for the ID Cooling Dashflow 240. An AIO with dashing good looks, darling. Excuse me, I didn't say that correctly.
I saw
An IO with dashing good looks, darling.
Darling. I saw that. That's the one with the really good looking RGB fans, right? And then it's got a really good RGB look on the pump as well.
Yeah, I have to say, for RGB, you know, I'm not a fan of what I call the rainbow vomit, but you know, this is actually very tastefully done. But I'm sorry, that's my opinion on RGB, is that a lot of times it just winds up looking like rainbow vomit.
That's hilarious. Oh my gosh, man. I was so close to buying that Thermaltake Ring Plus AIO. That is literally RGB vomit. That's rainbow vomit, man. Oh my gosh, that's hilarious. That's hilarious. Anybody who's ever seen YouTube videos or reviews on the super bright Corsair fans, you know, RGB fans, or the Ring Plus from Thermaltake, that's all it is. It's rainbow vomit, dude.
Well, I'm glad to introduce you to the term, because I mean, don't get me wrong. Yes, a good old-fashioned RGB display is an exciting thing to look at for a
Mhm.
little while. But honestly, most of my builds, I usually am looking for a specific color palette. You know, I'm either wanting my current machine, it's classic black and red with white accents.
Okay, so like a like standard MSI coloring.
Kind of,
Yeah.
sort of,
Yeah.
but it's the case is from a Cyber Power that I had before,
Mhm.
and so the I I might be able to show it here,
He's taking off the webcam.
but you can see I do have some RGB there.
Nice.
But you can see the fan grates are red.
Mhm.
I wonder if I can get over the top. Yep, you can see the fan dust covers are also red.
Nice.
And so I've got the RGB on my motherboard set to red. And I've got a set of Thermaltake, again, the ring fans, but the bands are set to solid red.
Nice.
And it's my Crimson Phoenix. So
Now, what do you have that's white? Case
the
mods?
Gigabyte
Cable mods?
the Gigabyte Aorus Gaming K5 board.
Okay.
It has white accents. I wanted to get the white Kingston HyperX RAM, but they didn't have any when I went to order them. So
Gotcha.
they're black. I
Gotcha.
do have a set of that I was using in my previous build of white Corsair LPX DDR3 RAM, but I could not find. Of course, now there's all kinds of white DDR4 RAM, but at the time, I couldn't find a good set of white DDR4 RAM.
Mm. Yeah, you got to be a little careful with lots of white components because it almost seems like there's not a white standard. You know, like there'll be
Right.
different shades of white. Like some will be off-white, some will be bleach white. They look pretty if you can get them matched up, but that's a researching headache all on its own.
Yep. But
Yep.
yes, the this ID Cooling Dashflow 240. It's very straightforward. It does have RGB. It's got a copper block, which is always a plus in my opinion when it comes to an AIO. And Tom's did some testing with it and compared it to some of the other commonly used 240 millimeter rads on the market. It falls slightly behind some of the market leaders, like the Corsair H150i Pro, but it's right around the same level as the Cooler Master Master Liquid ML240.
Which that's in the ballpark. I guess at that point, what it probably comes down to pricing. Because the Cooler Master AIO is pretty inexpensive.
Right. I was trying to see. Yeah, the Dash Flow being priced at $150. It was beat out pretty soundly in performance per value by the Cooler Master. But oddly enough, because it was significantly less expensive than the H150i Pro, it actually beat the H150i Pro, even though in performance per dollar.
$150 is really pricey for a 240.
Tis. I really, once you get past about the $80 to $100 price point for a 240 AIO, it's not really worth it at that point. At that point, if you're going to spend that kind of money, go get yourself a 360 rad or go get something like a Noctua NHD 15.
Right. Right. Or a 280. I mean, you can get a good 280 around $100. between 100 and 120.
NZXT's X62, I think, is right around that price point.
And they're typically about the most expensive that you can find. But you can find good, reliable, even some of the Ace Tech, variants, which are probably most of them. What's the Corsair H110? I think that's the.
That's the 280 version.
That's right around $100, 120, somewhere in there. The well, in fact, the Fractal Celsius C36 is right around $120. And that's a pretty solid. It's a pretty solid AIO, honestly. $150. You're paying for RGB.
Yeah, you're definitely paying for the RGB at that price point. But it is a beautiful. It's probably the best looking RGB AIO I've seen.
Yeah,
I'll give it that.
It's very pretty. And if price is no option, I'd definitely consider it.
Speaking of RGB, how about an RGB SSD? Team Group has released their Delta S RGB SSD. Yes, you heard that correctly. An SSD with RGB lighting. This is their marketing copy, by the way. Largest luminous RGB area with a ratio of 5:3. 16.8 million RGB colors with configurable single color lighting effect. Lighting effect can be synchronized with motherboard, which has 12-volt RGB header. And read and write speeds up to 560 megabytes per second. That's pretty standard for a SATA SSD. It's a 2.5 inch. Interestingly enough, it is 9.5 millimeters in height. Now, that strikes me as interesting because most modern SSDs are 7 millimeters in height.
Yeah, to fit in laptop bays.
So the fact that it is an extra 2.5 millimeters like your older laptop drives definitely indicates that they're shooting for this to be in the desktop. Because in the desktop, depth doesn't matter. In a laptop, it very much does matter.
Which it sounds to me like they took the standard 7 millimeter form factor, and the additional 2 to 2.5 inch or millimeter is probably going to be that RGB lighting array.
Right.
That's an interesting. So Team Group makes some very solid RAM products, and when you get into the RGB RAM realm, they've got some of the prettiest or aesthetically pleasing RAM kits that are out there. And I want to say a lot of them are somewhat affordable, especially when you're comparing them to like the Corsair Vengeance RGB or the G-Skill Trident RGB memory. Those are usually on the higher end of the pricing scales. But this is interesting. I wonder why they would do that. Because there's only a handful of cases that I can think of to where you have mounts for the SSD that are in the viewable bay. Like the NZXT S340 comes to mind. The Fantex, there's a few Fantex cases that come to mind where they either mount it on the side, like on the PSU shroud in the basement, or like right on top where you can see it. Other than that, most of your SSD mounts are on the back of either the motherboard tray or
underneath the PSU shroud.
Right.
But yeah, you were talking about Team Group's RGB products. I remember when their Nighthawk RGB came out, which was their first RGB line. And even still, those are some impressive looking sticks. Anything in their T-Force line is generally pretty impressive.
And
Uh,
they primarily use Samsung VDI, so they've got good RAM, good quality RAM. I know the
yep.
PCBs are good.
They just came out with their new Excalibur line, which is not really to my aesthetic taste, but it does have a full RGB light bar if that's your thing.
I'm not gonna lie, man. I've got a partial to RGB RAM right now.
Hey, with a system like yours in that P3 case, I don't blame you.
Yeah.
All right. Let's see what else we got here. Oh, yeah. So last week we talked about some of the leaks regarding NVIDIA's GTX 1100 series GPUs. This week, we have confirmation from NVIDIA that they are holding a GeForce gaming celebration before the start of Gamescom 2018 with what they call, quote, spectacular surprises.
Yep. Well, if you remember, this was the conference too where the agenda was leaked that they were going to talk about an upcoming graphics card release, and that was leaked out online. Somebody captured it, and it was quickly taken down. It was directly from this conference.
Right. And, you know, NVIDIA was really quick to deny that.
I can imagine. They're very tight-lipped about this upcoming graphics card line.
They're now holding this event on, strangely enough, August 20th, which was the same date as NVIDIA's now canceled next generation mainstream GPU presentation.
What do they do? Just rename it? It's a 2-day conference, right?
For Gamescom, Gamescom is actually significantly longer, but
well, NVIDIA's time
yeah,
slot.
their thing is going to be like a night and then part of the next day. So, and they're going to be live streaming the event. So, mark it on your calendars, August 20th. We may find out something about the next generation NVIDIA GPUs.
Finally.
Something beyond all the gobbledygook that's been leaked.
Yes.
And I specifically call it gobbledygook because, well, there's been several fakes. There's been a bunch of really vague stuff.
Well, it's primarily speculation. It's also people are just looking forward to having new tech. I mean, we've been on these cards for 2 years. So this is probably the longest we've gone in between releases. I want to say normally it's about 18 months. I could be mistaken. But
No, you're about right. There's only been one point in recent GPU history where we've had a longer wait, and that was with the GeForce 200 series. And that was way back in about 2008, 2009.
10 years ago.
Yep. The GeForce 200 series technically went for, I believe it was 26 months.
Wow.
Between the release of the 200 series and then the release of the 400 series, the Fermi cards, in 2010.
Beloved Fermi.
Hey, I've still got a machine that runs a GTX 460 and a GTX 560 Ti. So
nice. Nice.
And technically the 560 Ti is the 560 Ti 448 core, which was just a GTX 570 with one more SM disabled.
Ah. It's back when refreshes were a thing.
Yep. It was the 560 Ti 448 core. Basically, you could get almost GTX 580 levels of performance out of that card if you were willing to overclock it.
Mm-hmm.
Let's
I miss
see.
having 60 Ti parts.
Okay. All right. So first major topic of the evening. This kind of builds off something we talked about last week. There was that roadmap leaked of the Core i X series 9000 processors from Intel. Well, there's been more leaks. This first one being of a 3D Mark performance benchmark, specifically for 3D Mark Time Spy. And it was a entry coming from Tom Apasak, who is a tech journalist over in China, who has been very reliable about putting out leaks that have later been proven to be 100% true. And this particular leak was for a Time Spy 1.0 score of 9,862 with an NVIDIA GeForce GTX 1080 Ti and a genuine Intel CPU quadruple zero, which is pretty typically the signifier that pops up whenever a new CPU that has not been identified in the 3D Mark database pops up. And in particular, in this score, the CPU came up as an 8-core, 16-thread CPU with a stock clock of 3.1 gigahertz and a max turbo clock of 5 gigahertz, which fits almost exactly in line with what we've heard for the Core i9-9900K.
Yeah, press is stating that this is roughly 15% faster than the Ryzen 7 part, 2700X.
And
in the synthetic benchmarks.
Right. And honestly, that doesn't surprise me.
Mm-hmm.
The Ryzen 7 2700X, even at full XFR boost on all cores, runs about 4 gigahertz. This is running almost 20% faster in frequency.
Mm-hmm.
So for it to be running 15% faster overall, doesn't surprise me.
Doesn't surprise me either, but you're also looking at a part that's $150 more.
Right. The current scuttlebutt is that this part is likely to retail for $450 USD. Compare that to the fact that the Ryzen 7 2700X, I believe right now, let me check Newegg real quick. The 2700X is currently going for $329.
Yeah.
So you're paying about $120, $130 more for 15% performance uplift, which is not insignificant, mind you. But I mean, I just have to question, is that worth it? Unless you have a specific workload that is going to be helped by that.
Well, it comes down to the buyer. If they're willing to spend that extra bit of cash. Now I find myself leaning more towards AMD these days, but having been a proud owner of an i5 in the past, I just honestly, when you sit down and look at it, I don't know what kind of use cases you would need to really get that Core i9 part. I don't know. Really don't know. But I mean, more power to them. You know, if they can sell it for $450 to $500 and get people to pay that, more power to them. I don't think it'll really put a dent in the Ryzen 7 2700X sales at all.
No, I mean, honestly, even if it goes back to like it used to be. I remember when I was building my first gaming rig, the general wisdom was that you could get an AMD processor that would do 85% of the work or 85% of the speed of an Intel part for 2/3 the price.
Well,
And honestly, if you're running the 2700X, if it's selling for around 330, and the 9900K sells for around 450, then that pretty much still holds true.
I think they'll be closer than people realize in terms of performance. I mean, the 8700K is the quote-unquote gaming leader right now, but actually when you sit down and you benchmark them side to side, it's really not a huge difference. You're talking a few frames here and there. There are some games where there's still a bit of a difference, but not overall.
Yeah, generally the only place you're going to see a massive difference is in games that are largely not multi-threaded, where the frequency advantage that Intel holds is going to be far more significant.
Or they're not as optimized.
That too.
Which that's where your IPC gain will give you an advantage. It's interesting. I mean, for them to be able to do this at 14 nanometer, that's impressive. At that clock speed. Of course, I want to say the base is right around 3.6, so it'll boost up to 5 gigahertz. But I'm sure if it's not soldered, you're going to see lots and lots of people delidding them and putting liquid metal on them. That's impressive. That's impressive. I still don't see it as a competitor to the 2700X though, because it's in a different price bracket.
I mean, you could be right. You've mentioned in the past the potential of AMD releasing, a 2800X potentially to, as a price fighter against the 9900K. But honestly, I'm not sure they really need to. Because
I agree.
The 2700X is significantly lower enough in price, being almost $130 less, that I'm not sure they really fight in the same. I mean, technically, yes, they're both 8-core, 16-thread CPUs. But with a $130 difference, even if the 9900K does wind up having a 15% increase in performance over the 2700X, I'm still not sure that's worth it. Because that's almost a 50% increase in price for a 15% improvement in performance.
Right. Diminishing returns. Well, not to mention the platform cost too.
Speaking of, Asus has released its lineup of Z390 motherboards it will have at the launch of the 9000 series processors that Intel has not confirmed yet.
I wonder if these are just rebadged 370 PCBs.
Some of them, but not all of them.
I haven't even looked at these yet. Oh, they just have naming schemes. They don't even have pictures.
Yeah, all they've done is they've mentioned the names. They haven't shown any photos or anything like that yet. Because this was leaked from a document that they were sharing with another company, I believe.
Well, they're looking at potentially an October release, right?
That's what the rumors say. And speaking of spilling the beans, MSI also confirms 9th gen core processors that Intel hasn't announced yet. MSI,
Who hasn't released information? Sorry, go ahead.
MSI, PC World has a screenshot of this, but MSI put out an update today. August 1st is where we're recording this. MSI Z370 motherboards are optimized for Intel 9000 series processors. And then they put out a list of all the Z370s that are going to receive BIOS updates to support the 9000 series processors that are not announced yet.
Have you seen those box pictures of the H310s with 8-core support? Have you seen those?
Why?
I don't know.
Why?
I don't know. That's like buying an A320 and putting a 2700X on it. That's crazy. Yeah, I'll buy a $50 motherboard, put a $300 processor on it. Yeah, I'll do that.
Let's be honest. The only reason that the H310 and the A320 exist is for system integrators.
Yes.
So that they can purchase a bunch of them dirt cheap to put in their systems.
Mm-hmm. So you know what's interesting, Ned?
What's that?
If Coffee Lake Refresh does come out in October, I think that's right around Q3, almost seems like Q4. You know what happens 5 months after that?
Ryzen 3.
Yes, and the 7-nanometer SmackDown.
Oh, truly it is glorious times in which we live when it comes to computer hardware.
Yes, sir.
It's good to have the big two competing again.
It is.
Of course, I say big two, but it's really the giant versus the upstart. But
the mouthy upstart. Well, there's going to be some big things come out with 7-nanometer AMD. I'm just saying. Not only on the CPU front, but also the graphics front.
Right, because they're supposed to be releasing 7-nanometer Vega at the same time.
And that's going to be a totally different part than 14-nanometer Vega. Totally different.
Yeah, because
a lot of things.
I mean, 14-nanometer Vega had a huge die size. If they're shrinking the transistors by 50%, then you won't quite shrink die size by that same amount. But even if they shrink it by 25%, that's going to be a significantly smaller die, which means you're not going to be burning near as much power. You don't have as nearly much surface area to cool.
Mm-hmm. Well, the majority of the Maxwell to Pascal performance increase was moving from 28 nanometer to 14. So you're moving from 14 to 7. That's about the same shift in manufacturing process. That's a huge change.
And I mean, even in the move from 14 nanometer with Ryzen 1 to the 12 nanometer process that they used for Ryzen 2, they were able to increase clock speeds for XFR and for their PBO roughly, I think, like 5 to 10%. Because remember the XFR on the 1800X that I have is 4.0 gigahertz. For your 2700X, it's 4.3.
Yep. And they got far more aggressive too. So with their core count versus equivalent clock speed. So I want to say with Ryzen 1, the way it was tuned, it could do all core maybe 100 or 200 megahertz over base clock, but then the curve would go way down with the number of cores that would go up unless you're manually overclocking, which a lot of those Ryzen first gen parts could do 4 gigahertz all core, but at least 3.8 to 3.9, 3.8 to 4, somewhere in that range.
Right. The farthest
That's
I pushed my 1800X was to 3.9.
is it.
I've got. I'm using the SwiftTech H220X. I managed to get one before Asetek sued them. So I have one of the very few of those that actually exist.
Nice. Is it a good cooler?
It's a good cooler. Since it's basically a SwiftTech 240 millimeter rad connected to one of their heat killer blocks.
Mhm.
And the thing is, if I wanted to, because it uses normal fittings and normal tubing, I could literally unscrew the pipes from the CPU block, drain the radiator, add in GPU blocks for my RX 480s, put in new tubing for it all, and run it all as one kit.
Nice.
I actually have a. Give me just a second. I think I still have them.
Okay.
I'll let
Cross.
you carry the show for a minute.
Look at that. He's got his TechForge t-shirt. I can't even talk to him. Are we going to do some play-by-play? Okay. He goes in the box. He brings the box back to his desk with his snazzy-looking TechForge gaming t-shirt.
Oh yeah, got to stay on brand.
I was doing a play-by-play, Ned, as you were walking over to your bed and getting the box.
So this is from SwiftTech,
okay,
which I got when I got my H220X. And in this box is the kit. This is the back plate that goes with it. But this is the GPU kit for the RX 488 gig.
Oh, nice. Nice. Now, does that just fit the 480 reference cards, or?
It fits. The card I'm running is the XFX. Let's see. It's the reference PCB. The one I'm running is the XFX RX 480 GTR edition. But I'm pretty sure it's for reference PCBs.
Gotcha.
Now, I do not have a reference cooler on mine. I have the XFX cooler, which the GTR had the replaceable fans, where you could pop out the basic fans and put in RGB fans if you preferred. Given the opinions I've already stated about RGB earlier in the program, you can guess what I did.
What'd you do?
I left the basic fans in.
Not to segue, but I just went to XFX's website and I saw. So I've had XFX cards in the past that are mostly NVIDIA before they made the switch. This has to be the most unique graphics card design I've ever seen. It's a Vega 56.
Oh yes, their double dissipation card.
Yeah.
Yeah, that heatsink design is it's something else.
That's insane. That is an interesting looking card though. I've never seen a card like that before. I'm glad to see them still in business.
Yeah, I remember when I went shopping for my first, well, technically my second gaming GPU. My first gaming GPU was a massive mistake on my part.
Why?
So my first gaming GPU was a GeForce MX 4000.
Oh, we've talked about this. Okay. I'm remembering this now.
So I was a fan of BFG Tech at the time.
Mhm.
I had a lot of BFG Tech stuff. I couldn't afford the GTX 200 series at the time. So I wanted a BFG Tech GTX 260. That was the card I was wanting at the time. But I found a GeForce MX 4000, and not being nearly as knowledgeable as I am today, I went ahead and bought it because the specs sounded pretty good. 128 megabytes of GDDR2, which was the standard at the time. It was the 4000 series, which was a couple generations old, but it sounded all right to me. It wasn't until later that I researched the card and found out that it was basically a GeForce 2 MX with cranked clock speeds. It did fine for some of the games I wanted to play, some of the older ones.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, my second card when I went looking was an XFX. And this was right before they switched to being an AMD builder. And it was a 7600 GS, if I remember correctly.
Which, that's not a bad GPU, really, back in the day.
For its time period, no, it wasn't. No, wait. Was it the GTX 260 I was looking at? No. GTX 260 was the one I was looking at right when the 460 came out, and that's why I got the 460. That was back during the 8800 series that was so famous for NVIDIA, which I did wind up a couple of years after that getting an EVGA 9800 GT and a second one that I ran in SLI till I got the 460.
And I imagine you're probably on the 460 for a while.
I had the 460 until I replaced it with the 560 Ti. And honestly used the 460 system for a long time after that. Actually, I still have the tower for it right here in my computer desk. It's just not the main one I use anymore.
Mm-hmm.
It's probably actually going to get disassembled pretty soon, and its parts reused in a different build.
Cool.
In particular, the case, the PSU, I've got a Core i7-2600K on a Z68 board that I got for a project a while back that fell through. And so I figure I might as well build that up, and I think that's going to be my new Linux system. Because my old Linux system is an old Q6600 system that is not going to get the Spectre and Meltdown updates. So I don't feel, given that there's already exploits in the wild for that, I don't really feel safe running that system connected to the internet.
Yeah, I don't blame you.
But before we get too far afield, because we still have a lot to talk about this evening, AMD Threadripper, we have more leaks. The first one, this one's from WCCF Tech. We have the specs were leaked for the 2990X. There's some speculation that it's actually going to be the 2990WX. The idea being the WX variant might come with its own water cooler.
Oh, okay.
The 2970X and the 2950X. Supposedly, the 2990X is 32 cores, 64 threads at 250 watt TDP. The 2970X will be 24 cores and 48 threads at 180 watt TDP. And the 2950X, much like the current 1950X, will be 16 cores, 32 threads at 125 watts.
Well, when you break down number of cores per watt, that's actually pretty efficient. So what is that? Let's bring up the old calculator. So I can tell you just by looking at the 16 core at 125 watts, that's pretty efficient.
Especially in comparison to the 1950X, its predecessor, which was also 16 cores, 32 threads, but it was rated at 180 watts. So apparently for Threadripper at least, the move to 12 nanometer has come with significant thermal benefits.
So, well, yeah. And I'm sure they're binning just like they did with Threadripper Root, Gen 1, where they bin the top 5% of the Ryzen cores for Threadripper. So I'm sure they're doing a similar practice. So
I'm sure they are.
So the 16 core part, it's essentially 7.8 watts TDP per core.
That's pretty impressive.
That's not bad. When you look at the 2700X, it's at 13.1 watt per core. So I wonder what the 24 core is at 180. I wonder if that scales linearly.
Pretty closely. That's 7.5 watts per core.
Okay. So I imagine it's probably 7-ish then for the 32.
About 7.8-ish.
Okay.
So
yeah, 7.5 to 7.8. So it is kind of linear. That's almost twice as efficient as my 2700X.
I mean, considering previously, Threadripper, the 1950X, at 180 watts was about 11.25 watts per core.
That's some pretty significant efficiency gain.
Yeah, that's what, around 35%?
Sounds about right.
I stand corrected. If we use the 7.8 figure, which is the worst case scenario, that represents almost a 44% improvement.
Wow.
In watts per core.
That's pretty significant.
Yeah, that's kind of hard to argue.
That's pretty significant. I wonder what the clock speeds are going to be.
Well, according to WCCF Tech, and they got their information from HWBot, the 2950X will start at a base clock of 3.1 gigahertz, which is lower than the 3.4 gigahertz of the 1950X. The 2970X will run at roughly 3.5 gigahertz, and the 2990 at roughly 3.4 for base clock. As for boost or XFR clock, who knows?
Well, I have no idea how those are tuned, but I can tell you on my 2700X, I have yet to see it go below 3.95 gigahertz all core. So I'm sure you won't see. I don't know how those are tuned. That's interesting. Which actually, that's still pretty fast when you think about it.
For a 32 core part or 32, yeah.
Yeah, well, 16, 24, 32.
The 2990X, the 32-core part, is expected to launch on August 13th at about $1,500. And yes, that's expensive, but compare that to the Core i7-79 or Core i9-7980XE, a 28-core part.
Was that 2K?
Or excuse me, the 7980XE is an 18-core part, and it's almost $2,000.
Yeah. Wow. And they've mentioned that these should run in current Threadripper boards with a BIOS update, right?
Yes. Now, all the major manufacturers are releasing new Threadripper boards for X399 chipset, but also they should be able to BIOS update the current boards to be able to handle the new Threadripper 2000 series.
Hopefully they've got some beefier VRM, because I imagine if you're looking at a 250 watt TDP, you know, most of your workloads will probably likely sit below that, but you'll probably have some workloads that could potentially consume, you know, 350, even 400 watts.
Wouldn't surprise me.
That's a hit on a VR.
But we have another leak, this one coming from over at Tom's Hardware. They spotted the Ryzen Threadripper 2990WX listed at a retailer for $1,835.
Why do they have a WX?
Well, technically, it was listed at Canada Computers for $2,399 Canadian, which is equivalent to $1,835 USD.
Okay.
Of course, we don't have any official pricing yet. But given that the 2990WX is two Threadripper 1950Xs on a single multi-chip module, that asking price is reasonable. But since we don't have an exact price structure yet, because Threadripper has not yet technically been announced.
So I'm looking at the CPU-Z screenshot of the 2990WX. It's running at a core speed of effectively 4.1 gigahertz with a core voltage of 0.912. 0.912. Either that's not correct or that's some crazy heavy good binning.
Yeah. Because
wow.
I was going to say my 1800X, it's usually running about 1.25 volts. You know, if I really want to push it hard and I want to try to overclock it a little, 1.3, 1.4 maybe for day-to-day use. If I'm trying to just hit those benches, maybe 1.5 for short periods of time.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're running at less than a volt on Ryzen, you're doing quite well.
At 4.1 gigahertz? Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Of course, it's been a meme for a while that with AMD products, generally if you undervolt them, then overclock them, you'll get superior performance.
Well, there's a few articles out there with, you know, people undervolting the Zen Plus parts and overclocking to around 4 gigahertz and seeing significant performance gains and lowering their power consumption. So,
Indeed.
yeah, they've definitely worked some magic in the new silicon.
But enough about Threadripper. Let's get to the real meat of what we are here to talk about this evening, and that is AMD's B450 motherboards. They're finally released.
Yes. Feels like we've been waiting forever for these, man.
Yeah, the X470s came out what?
June?
Like April?
No,
June?
March.
March, that's right.
With the Zen Plus launch, yeah.
Right, and so here we are 5 months later, and finally the B450 boards launch.
It literally feels like a lifetime.
But thankfully, I've got a number of articles here that I'll have listed in the show notes down in the description below. But the first one, I don't want to maybe discuss it as much here on the channel, but for those of you who are watching, there's an excellent primer put together by Brad Chacos over at PC World called AMD Ryzen Motherboards Explained, talking about the differences between all the parts, all the different chipsets for the AM4 motherboards. In particular, the one we're going to focus on tonight is the B450 chipset. It's the mid-tier chipset just below the X470. There are a few features it doesn't have, but it does allow overclocking, and it does allow you to utilize the highest end processors to their full extent. It supports XFR, it supports StoreMI, it supports M.2 slots, USB 3.1 Gen 2, all the peripheral stuff you'd expect at a much lower price, at a much lower price point to X470. And as we'll see when we look at some of the motherboards that have been recently released, Jason has done an excellent job going through and looking at some of these motherboards. There's some different winners and some definite losers. And there's some B450 boards that are actually better than some of the entry-level X470 boards.
Indeed.
I also linked another article, this one also from PC World by Gordon Maung. He used to be the editor-in-chief over at Maximum PC until he joined the PC World crew to become their executive editor. And he does an excellent breakdown of the B450 chipset and everything you need to know in that regard.
Yeah, he normally does a really good job, especially with chipsets and processors and video cards.
The main thing you give up with the B450 chipset over the X470 is you do not get Crossfire or SLI.
Correct.
Although, for some reason, AMD decides to be obscure about this in their documentation and call it CPU PCIe bifurcation.
That sounds like a clinical term. That sounds like a surgery, like I'm going to get something chopped off. Bifurcation.
But no, in this case, it's referring to SLI or Crossfire. The PCIe bifurcation, apparently, is the fact that it splits up the PCIe lanes for GPUs into ×8×8 configuration, whereas the B450 chipset only has a ×16 and a ×4 slot.
Right.
So it cannot do the bifurcation between the two to make them ×8×8.
And there's only one other major difference, but you have to spend a lot of money to get it, between the X470 and the B450. If you're willing to spend $280 or more on an X470 board, the top end boards like the Gaming 7 from Gigabyte, the ROG, oh, what do they call that thing? Crossfire Hero or whatever that thing is from Asus.
The I think it's the Crosshair 7 or Crosshair 8, something like that.
Yeah. Essentially, those $300 motherboard behemoths, the only thing you usually gain there is a lot more I/O and a huge VRM. And probably some of the best VRM cooling that you can find in boards around that price point. That's about the only gain that you get beyond SLI and Crossfire.
So that's why the B450 and its predecessor, the B350, are such an appealing target for the mid-range buyer, because if you're just going to be running a single GPU, then it makes more sense to get the B450 board, because you're only going to be running a single GPU, and save a whole bunch of money up front on your platform that still gets you all the major features that most enthusiasts are going to care about.
Exactly.
But with that said, one has to be careful in their board selection. As Steve from Hardware Unboxed found out, he received a set of 4 different boards, one each from MSI, Asus, ASRock, and Gigabyte. And he tested their VRM solutions, the exact thing you were talking about. For those who are not familiar, VRM stands for Voltage Regulator Module. And it's essentially the part of the motherboard that controls how much power your CPU receives.
Not just how much power, but how clean the power delivery is.
That's true. And so having a high-quality VRM that can supply the power required by your CPU consistently is crucial to maintaining top performance, particularly if you want to overclock.
Or if you just simply want the auto-tuning on the Ryzen 2000 series parts to really take good effect and see good performance from XFR2 and Precision Boost Override. It does look at VRM, power delivery, and quality as well. So lack of good VRM will hurt your performance. Not only will it make your PC run hotter, but your Ryzen 2000 part won't clock as high.
And so I won't spoil what the results were, but you can probably guess from the video's title, B450 VRM Temp Test, Asus and Gigabyte Disappoint, what he found. So I won't spoil that. But one of the boards that he reviewed there actually got a review over at Tom's Hardware, the B450 Aorus Pro Wi-Fi from Gigabyte. And so, interestingly, Tom's Hardware gave that board an 8 out of 10. But they did say this in their verdict. While this board can't quite push Ryzen chips to their limits, only expect modest overclocks, but otherwise, Gigabyte delivers an excellent value here that's worthy of the Aorus brand. So in other words, it's a solid board, but do not expect to overclock it to the maximum. However, Steve over at Hardware Unboxed did mention in his video that his particular example board gave him some weird stability issues that may have not been related to the VRM at all, and so he may have received a defective board.
Yeah,
but the fact that other reviewers are also noting that, hey, this one is generally solid, but it doesn't overclock as high as the others, your mileage may vary.
Well, honestly, being a user of the Aorus X470 Ultra gaming board, the VRM and PCB are very similar to that board that was referenced in those articles. The VRM does run hot on this board. Now, I don't know if it's because of the VRM components or the fact that I'm running a 2700X. but it does run hot. So you need active cooling on the VRM to basically make it perform like it should. Essentially, the combination of the VRM and the BIOS runs a higher voltage on the Ryzen part than you probably need. So I think that's part of the issues they were finding with the Gigabyte part that they were reviewing.
And you're probably right. I have the Gaming 5, the X370 version of that board, and generally I find it to be excellent for everything I've thrown at it. I've never had any throttle problems. The only time I ran into any problems was when I attempted to play PUBG on it for the first time, and it would literally crash every 20 minutes. That turned out to be a problem with PUBG rather than the motherboard or any of the PC.
Oh. Well, PUBG is kind of known for its performance issues anyway and its stability problems.
Particularly with AMD and Radeon hardware. But
that's gotta be annoying.
Yeah, it definitely was there for a bit. But I also linked in the show notes an article from AnonTech, and they did a real deep dive looking at 25 of the motherboards available on the B450 chipset. And probably my favorite bit of that is at the end, they put together a board where they talked about, if you're looking for a particular feature, these are the motherboards that have it.
Oh, nice.
If you're looking for Intel Gigabit LAN, these are the ones that have it. If you're looking for Wi-Fi, these are the ones that have it. If you're wanting 2 M.2 slots, these are the ones that have it. And they also arranged all the motherboards that they tested and showed their prices relative to each other and from each manufacturer. In particular, it looks like some of the best prices come from MSI and ASRock. And it looks like for Asus in particular, you're going to be paying a bit more.
Almost seems like you're paying for the name.
Some standouts that they pointed out were the B450 Tomahawk from MSI at $110. And the ASRock B450 Gaming ITX AC. It was at $130 on the high end for a B450 board, but it's literally one of only 2 available mini ITX options. And so, Jason, I'll let you take over from here. You did a really good job compiling a list and looking at the available B450 boards on Newegg, which I've included a link in the show notes to Newegg's AMD B450 motherboard listings for anyone who's curious.
So I think I'll go ahead and share my screen then, if you don't mind.
Go right ahead.
What do I do here? Control room, screen share.
Yep.
So screen. It's screen 2. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes, you might want to make sure to choose the option to where it's always showing your screen, so that when I'm talking, it doesn't make the screen disappear.
How do I select that controller?
Yeah, if you go back over to screen share, there should be an option to, when you're sharing your screen, to always show my screen.
Oh, I don't have that option.
Okay, well, I might have to do it with mine then. That's okay. Well, you can do it that way. Present to everyone. There we go. All right. So I've got the page here from Newegg showing the motherboards we're going to be talking about. And so if you want to read from your list, I'll try to bring them up as we go.
Let's see. Okay, so I essentially just broke these down into price points, and all I did was I went to Newegg and I filtered by socket AM4 and chipset AMD B450, and then I sorted by lowest price first, and I just took a look at the different price points. So the first price point I kind of looked at was kind of the higher tier of the B450, from the basically $110 to $129. I saw a couple of standouts. So probably at the top of the pricing chain, the MSI B450 Gaming Pro Carbon AC. I really liked, namely because it's got really good VRM. So when you look at the board, it's got really solid VRM heat sinks and just VRM components. I also like kind of its bling factor, so I'm kind of an RGB fan right now. And this board has some lighting accents all around, as well as some standard RGB headers. It's also got Wi-Fi, which doesn't come on every board, so that's a nice plus. And it's got pretty solid I/O. So when you expand on the I/O, you've got your Wi-Fi there. Then if you're running an APU, you've got DisplayPort and HDMI. You've got a pretty decent number of USB ports, pretty standard for B450. But overall, this board's got pretty much everything that you could find in a mid-range X470 part, with solid VRM and solid VRM cooling. And what you'll notice as we kind of dive into these a little bit further is that MSI's pretty much done a good job with the B450 range. When you look at a lot of the reviews, any of the MSI boards that you see, namely the VRM runs really cool, and they don't have any heating issues at all with the VRM. So you've got really solid build quality. Overall, this is the best board, I think, in the range, but you're also paying a premium for it at $129. Now, the second board I liked in this range was the Asus ROG Strix B450F. I don't think the VRM is quite as good as the MSI part, but I think it's good enough at this price point. And also, when you come to an Asus product or an Asus motherboard, they always have solid software. You're not going to really run into any, or you shouldn't be running into any issues with software or the BIOS. Everything just seems to work. And this board in particular has got just really solid build quality. And if you're into the bling factor, you've got some RGB accents as well. And I want to say one of the more premium aspects is the I/O shield is built directly into the board. So you don't really have to worry about putting an I/O shield on, as it's built directly into that. Beyond that, these are probably the two best boards that are in the B450 current product stack, but they're also priced that way too, at $129 a piece. So as far as I'm concerned, it's probably a tie between these two. And then you could probably list an honorable mention going to the Gigabyte B450 Aorus Pro Wi-Fi. This board is going to be pretty solid. And I know that it's not had very good reviews from a VRM perspective, but if you have a top-down cooler or a decent ATX case with some decent airflow, you're not really going to be running into any VRM issues. Or if you're just putting like a 6-core part on there, even if it's a 2600X, you really won't be running into any VRM issues. Now, if you run a 2700X on this thing, you might find a few workloads where the VRM could be an issue. But overall, I feel this is a nice honorable mention. You've got good I/O, Wi-Fi built in. Just overall, pretty solid board. Now, when it comes to what I'm going to call the junk pile for the $110 to $129 price point, I'm looking specifically at the Asus Tough board. I think this board at $119 is overpriced. Really, there's not a whole lot bad to say about the board per se. It's just when you look at a few things here, say you were to expand on the picture of the board itself, if you look at the VRM components and the VRM cooling and compare it to, so even if you spend $10 more and just get the Asus Strix, ROG Strix board, and you look at the VRM area, the SoC VRM at the top, and then the V-Core VRM on the side, you just have by far better cooling and components when you compare it to the $10 cheaper Tough board. In my opinion, this should be priced at least $20 less. If this board was priced around $100, I'd say this would be a good buy. But at $119, it's in my junk category for this price point. I don't understand why this board is at $119, especially when you could spend effectively $10 more and get so much more value. Or even at the same price point, you've got this Gigabyte B450 Aorus Pro Wi-Fi that gives you a lot more value. It's just, there's a night and day difference. Now moving on to the $90 to $110 price point, I think this is where you start to really look at some of the real solid value boards in this B450 product stack. So a couple of standouts here are the MSI B450 Tomahawk. Now, in some of the reviews today, this has gotten some very, very good reviews. And we'll kind of break it down a little bit here as to why. Look at the VRM. So look at your V-Core VRM, which is the picture here on the side. And then at the top, you've got your SoC VRM. What your SoC VRM is responsible for is powering your memory controller in your Ryzen part, or if you've got an APU, it's responsible for your memory controller and your graphics part of your APU. Now, when you compare it to the motherboard that's, how much is this? So if you look at the Asus Tough board, which is $10 more than this, there's a night and day difference between the VRM cooling. Just these heat sinks are a lot bigger. The VRM components are, in my opinion, a little better. And that's you can also see that in the reviews today of this board, where they're running the 2700X in a lot of workloads that really tax the processor. This VRM specifically was running extremely cool, especially compared to some of the other boards they were reviewing. Just in my opinion, this is probably the best overall value in the B450 product stack. I can't say enough good things about this board. At $109, this thing's a steal.
Yeah, this is the one that I had been focusing a lot of my attention on, just because it looks like a solid choice all around.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's not only the build quality and the VRM quality, but it's color neutral. I mean, it's black and gray. It
right.
would fit a ton of different builds. Now, it's not going to have as good of an audio subprocessor as some of the other ones, but it's got the basic Realtek codec, which is pretty good. but you can look around and find other boards to fit your needs. It also doesn't have Wi-Fi, but you can find a Wi-Fi USB chip or a PCI Express add-on component for $20. So, but overall, I think this is the best overall value. Now, also in this price point, I did see something else. The ASRock Vitality board. Let's say, yeah. So at $10 less, you've got the ASRock Vitality B450 Gaming K4. Reviewed today. This board also came out pretty well overall, just in terms of build quality and VRM cooling. This board didn't consume a whole lot of power compared to its competitors, and the VRM did stay surprisingly cool. And at $100, this is a really decent value as well. Now it does have pretty decent VRM. It may not look as good as some of the competition. Notice there's no I/O shield, but these are using actual heat sinks. They're not fake heat sinks like a lot of the competitors do. But this is kind of an ASRock. I want to say on a lot of the ASRock boards between $80 to $200, like you'll find really good VRM heat sinks. So this would be my second pick in this price point. An honorable mention, I would have to say, would go to the MSI B450 Gaming Plus AM4. So where is that?
I've got it pulled up here on screen.
I think that's got a red and black.
It does.
Okay. So this was my honorable mention in this price point. I don't think it's quite as good as the Tomahawk, but then again, it is also $10 cheaper. So if you're looking for something to fit a black and red scheme, this is a pretty good pick. MSI is pretty well known so from the last generation of Ryzen boards to this generation, they're pretty well known for having pretty good VRM performance. So you're not really going to run into any issues there. You could put a 2700X on this thing and it would perform just as well as most of the other boards in the B450 range. It does have pretty decent I/O. So if you put an APU on here, you do have a DVI and an HDMI out. It doesn't have DisplayPort, which is interesting. But I mean, it's a pretty no frills motherboard. It'll pretty much do everything you need it to do. The only thing I think I kind of knocked it for was the red and black color scheme. It's not going to fit every build out there, but that's about the only thing I can really knock it for. Otherwise, it's pretty solid. Now moving on to the junk. Again, we have an Asus TUF board, and this really pains me. I don't like to see TUF boards not being good, but the reason this, again, it's the price point. It's $100, and when you look at it, there's no SoC VRM cooling at all. All of the MOSFETs are pretty much open and bare. Now, this really won't be an issue if you've got some sort of active cooling either blowing across it, or if you're running the stock cooling from the processor, like the downforce air blowing directly onto the board should cool it, but don't expect any decent overclocking performance. Your XFR2 and Precision Boost could be hampered as well. It's just at this price point, the only thing this motherboard really has over its competitors is probably the form factor, being a UATX. But this is my junk. This is my junk pick for $99. Spend $10 more. What's that?
That really is kind of unfortunate, because I remember I had a Sabertooth 990FX board at one time and a Sabertooth X58 board back when those were the tough series. And those things, you could not kill them.
I agree. I mean, that's back when those things were tanks, and they were built extremely well. They had better, so those things had better VRM heat sinks and componentry than what the current Tough series has. I mean, aesthetically, it's an interesting looking board, and they've even got Tough branding, which extends beyond Asus. So you can find cases, RAM, heat sinks, even an AIO or two, probably, I want to say, that fits this tough scheme or display aesthetic. It's just at $100, I have a tough time recommending this board over something, say, like this ASRock Fatality, which has got very solid VRM, good I/O, or spending just $10 more and getting the Tomahawk. The Tomahawk is a fantastic board. And so if you go back to the MSI B450, the Tomahawk was their best seller. And when you look at the current variant or the new variant of the Tomahawk board, you can kind of see why, especially when you start looking at some of the other boards in the same price range. Now moving on, yeah, I'm just really sad about the two Tough boards here. If this board was even $85, I would say it would be competitive, and we'll get to that here in a second. Because the next price point we're going to look at is essentially $89.99 and less. So when you start getting down at below $90, that's when you start seeing your micro ATX boards, and there's a couple here that stand out to me. So the first board I'm gonna look at again is an MSI board. It's the B450 Pro. So when you pull it up, the first thing I look at is the VRM. Now, I don't think these are full-fledged heat sinks, but at least they're trying here. Now, I want to say this VRM is slightly worse than the Tomahawk, but you should be just fine running a 2700 or a 2700X on this thing. And at the price point, at $89, this is probably, I think this is tied for my favorite pick.
Yeah, aesthetically, you're not going to be getting quite what you will with, say, the Tomahawk, but
right.
I mean, if you're going to be building something that's more about function than form, then yes, this is an excellent pick.
I think it is too. Mainly because, you know, say you're very budget conscious and you're looking for the best board you can find, probably some sort of a bundle or something like that. This is a kind of board that you can pick up and not really worry about it. You know, you can just slap a build together and probably even get some decent overclocks out of it, and it'll be just fine. It'll be stable. It'll perform well. I want to say it's got, I don't know if it's got 2 M.2, but it's definitely got 1 on there. And the I/O looks pretty good. And in fact, you'll see a rarity here where it's even got a VGA port. So you've got VGA, DVI, and HDMI out if you're running an APU. It's just pretty much a solid pick. I mean, it's not going to blow you away with features or anything like that. It's pretty average, but it's a good, solid board. And so my other tie here was this ASRock A450 Pro 4, which it's got some different aesthetics to it. So it could fit, you know, some specific schemes. But again, when you look at the VRM cooling, I don't think it's quite as good as the MSI pick at the same price, but it's still pretty solid at 90 bucks. Again, this is a board you can just kind of slap together and not really have to worry about. VRM's pretty solid, or the I/O is pretty solid here as well. This does have two M.2 slots, which it almost seems pretty standard with most B450 boards. But again, this is just kind of a solid pick. Nothing too special about it. Now, my honorable mention here, I want to say I had a kind of a three-way tie for my honorable mentions here. The first being the MSI B450M Bazooka board. So this is $84. This is a micro ATX board. When you start getting down to this price point, you start losing in features. So you'll notice there's no SoC VRM. I/O is about the same as the $90 boards. I don't think this has Intel networking. It's also got kind of a restrictive HD audio section as well. But honestly, at this price point, the VRM cooling's pretty decent, and the I/O is pretty good. It's a pretty solid pick. But when you start getting down to this price point, you're almost getting to the value section. And unfortunately, micro ATX is not Ryzen's strong suit right now. Kind of another tie I had was this Gigabyte B450 Aorus. It's pretty much a very similar board feature-wise. Now, if we continue the trend with VRM performance, the MSI is probably going to be a little better. But at least you do get a V-core heatsink on the left here. But you'll notice that the SoC VRM MOSFETs are bare and open. So you'll want to definitely have some sort of airflow across those. As long as it's like a downforce CPU cooler or an ATX case where you've got like a front intake fan and one exhaust, that should be enough. And then my third pick, which is kind of a tie, was the ASRock B450M, which I believe is another micro ATX board. So this one here. So this has slightly better VRM cooling than the other two. So if that's going to be an issue, or if you're working in a case that doesn't quite have very good airflow, you might want to select this one over the other two. Also, it does come in a little cheaper at $79. The I/O is pretty solid. Nothing too special to really write home about. It doesn't have a full like or audio port feature set like some of the other ones, but I think the majority of us just run, you know, 2 speakers or a headset anyway. So nothing really to write home about. Just kind of a solid pick if you're on a strict budget. This is probably the one I would pick. And then the junk comes in at another Asus board. So my junk pick for this price point was the Asus Prime B450MA. So this board right here, $87. $87. I have a real problem with this. There is absolutely no VRM cooling at all. And this is the most expensive of the boards that we've looked at in this price point. Completely bare VRM. This is a board I would not put a 2700X in, or I would be very, very skeptical, unless I had some. I mean, when you have to buy a board and you have to look at buying, you know, thermal pads and thermal heat sinks and put a fan on top of it just to run a processor, I don't know. I'm very skeptical of this board. If this was $20 less, I would probably be less skeptical. But at $87, it's not really worth the money, in my opinion. Especially when we've looked at a board that's, you know, $8 less than this in the ASRock that's got far better VRM cooling. So I would be really worried about somebody picking this up. I wouldn't suggest this board at all.
All right.
And that's pretty much all I had. I mean, we could get into what I thought was the best mini ITX board, but there's only two, and I think they're so close that you'd almost call it a tie. But overall, I think the best value is this Tomahawk board. And it when you kind of look at these boards holistically, it looks like MSI just pretty much comes away with a steal. Just at every price point, it seems like they have the best overall, with the ASRock coming in at a close second. I'm not a fanboy, but there's some really solid MSI gems in here, honestly.
Well, thank you very much, Jason, for that excellent analysis.
Welcome.
Oh. Let's get back to having our faces on screen here. All right. And that pretty much brings us to everything we want to discuss this evening. So any last words, Jason?
Brain dead.
Yeah, I'm about had it myself. But of course, I'd like to thank everyone once again for tuning in and joining us here on the TechForge. Hopefully Hunter can join us back again next week.
Sweet.
As I've said before, show notes and article links to all the articles we've discussed, as well as links to the Newegg page for the AMD B450 motherboards, will be in the description down below. You can also find links to all our social media stuff, to Facebook, Twitter, Patreon, Discord, all that good stuff. You can join us on the CrossForge Gaming community if you like the content you're seeing here. And once again, I've been Dynamo Ned. This has been the latest episode of TechForge. And remember, when life gets you down, Jesus loves you. And remember to always forge on.